Both skills education and lifelong learning are receiving ever-increasing amounts of attention from universities, the press, and politicians, but challenges persist about how best to deliver one as part of the other. This is partly because of the way in which universities are asked to reshape curricula quickly and differently in response to the lockdown created by the pandemic, but also because universities are asked to undertake a large cultural change in the way they offer teaching and learning against a backdrop of a fast-changing and uncertain job market. To that end, I'd like to begin by asking, how can skills education increase student attainment and employability? Raghav, increasingly Coursera supports universities by talking about skills education. Can you tell us a little bit about the requirement to do more now and how it is geared to very much helping students become more employable in the future?
Yes, absolutely, Alistair, and absolute pleasure to be here on this event and with Dr. Misaki as well. I think a starting point, as we talk about skills and employability, is obviously to understand what's changing with industry, right? I think that has to be the starting point, right? And as Coursera, we work with many businesses. We work with businesses in Asia, in other parts of the world. And the industry has been talking about what is called double disruption. The industry has been saying, look, automation was already happening. COVID-19 has accelerated many things. And as a part of double disruption, industry is saying four things. In the next 4 or 5 years, there are going to be lesser jobs. Many of these jobs will require different skills. Many companies will continue to have people work from home even after the pandemic goes away. And almost 90% of businesses are saying that jobs will be more digital because the pace of digitization across the world and in businesses has grown. And so for academia to be thinking about job-related skills, it's important to think about what are the skills of the future. How does digital, irrespective of which segment or which discipline a student is studying in, how does digital come in and how does data come in? And we looked at the Coursera platform and we said, look, what did people who are working professionals on our platform learn in 2019? And did it change in 2020 when the pandemic kicked in? And we found that at least till 2019, a lot of the learning, and this is upwards of 80 million people around the world, a lot of the learning was actually happening around technology skills, and it was happening around data skills, and it was happening around business skills. But what happened in 2020 was human skills came into the limelight as well. How do we communicate with each other? How do you manage mental health? How do you manage stress? A lot of those skills came up into the future as well. And organizations like the World Economic Forum have been saying that the future of industry is going to be professionals who have a combination of digital, data, and human skills. And I think that's a good starting point for academia to think about, that as we think about getting students ready for the future of work, how do we bring some of this into the curricula of universities around Asia? Maybe that's a good starting point for this conversation.
Yeah, it's certainly not an easy question to answer, but it's nonetheless one I'd like to ask Misaki about. Just to if you can tell us a little bit about what the process looks like at your institution now. How are things changing in the way that you teach skills to students?
Right. So first of all, thank you for having me on this panel. It's an honor. Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology Graduate University is an interesting choice for this conversation. If I could briefly introduce our university to contextualize what I'm going to say, is that we only offer PhD in science degree. So we do not have undergraduates, we do not have master's programs. 80% of our students are international, 20% Japanese. English is the language of instruction and business. And of course, as PhD granting research-focused university, the main outcome that we expect students to produce in a degree is a research thesis that is an associated publications that are recognized as of high quality by international experts, right? So where do skills education programs, curricula fit in? From the beginning of a program, we're only 9 years old, by the way. What we call professional career development has always been a credit-bearing graduation requirement. And I think that was really a good, the founders had a very good foresight for what was going to be required of PhDs in the near future. And so what we offer in that professional and career development is for the first year PhD students to kind of prepare them for life in research, at least for 5 years that they're here with us, research ethics design, navigating potential challenges as a PhD student, issue of authorship or funding, and basically life as a researcher. But also we threw them into a service learning group work in the first year. And what students say that they learn out of that is project management skills, leadership, problem solving, critical analysis, and that kind of things, as well as communication among the team members, as well as, because it's a service learning project, right? They have to actually communicate with people outside of the campus community. So cross-cultural communication and such. So at the moment, and then of course, COVID made the world actually smaller, and I was sharing before that we were able to take advantage of Coursera free subscription during the height of the COVID pandemic. So students were able to actually take more science-related courses actually as extra credit, external credit to bring into toward their graduation requirement.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Misaki. Raghav, to that point, you mentioned the importance of gathering quality data as part of this process in order to help universities support how they teach and meet different kinds of student requirements now. Does Misaki's description of the kind of group work and greater flexibility that takes place as part of digital learning, has that been something that's been a general trend throughout the Asian region?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I can contextualize that slightly wider as well, Alistair. And as I said, step one, start with figuring out how industry is changing and focus on, thinking about what are these skills of the future to be bringing into the curricula. If I were to take us to step two, and there are 3 parts to step two, and this is where, Coursera for Campus kind of comes in, and we work with OIST as a part of this as well. 2A is working on just augmenting the curriculum, right? So we work with universities where they say, look, either a faculty member or a faculty member who's teaching on Coursera at some university around the world should be able to come in and bring those skills of the future that my students should be learning. So, future-proof your curriculum as an element of that. An MBA student might need to learn a topic in finance related to fintech, and that's an example of that. The second thing could be introduce cutting edge technology skills, right? And I differentiate this from what I said earlier, because the same MBA student who's learning fintech might need to learn blockchain, which may not be traditionally, what you might be learning as an MBA student. So, 2A, future-proof your curriculum. And within that, think about, bringing in cutting edge skills, whether they come from your faculty or whether they come from somebody who's an expert who's teaching on the Coursera platform is one piece. 2B, to my mind, is making the learning experience more hands-on. And I think this is to your point as well, Alistair. We launched something called guided projects on Coursera last year, middle of last year. And the intent was that we're finding that not just for computer science students, not for just engineering students, but for pretty much any student, across disciplines, management and commerce and law, most of us in the working world are using some or the other software. And the idea behind hands-on learning with guided projects has been to say that, look, how can we provide an expert who can actually teach a student how to use a particular software tool in a hands-on environment without necessarily having to buy that software, install it on their machine, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the second piece. And then to see, if I may, just to give this some structure, is very specific, helping students focus on getting specific roles in companies. So, if you work with a tech company, and if you want to work with a tech company and you're, a computer science student, one of the very popular roles is a full stack web developer. And can you build a path towards saying, look, to become a full stack web developer at company X in so and so country, here's the curriculum that can get me towards that particular role. So just being very intentional, very deliberate about targeting certain specific roles. And that, in a sense, would be my 2A, 2B, and 2C.
Great, thank you. Misaki, is that level of integration and that level of specification something that you are now finding from students when they are completing their PhDs? Are their requirements changing in terms of what they want your institution to teach them while they are studying?
Not quite, I'm afraid. Again, every student who decides to come to OIST is after research experience here. And even even from the faculty body side, we do not have faculty to teach anything but their specialties in sciences. So however, what's interesting is that when we poll our students as to what career paths they're interested in, academia or becoming a professor immediately is not number one. What's number one is working in the research institute or industries. They're neck to neck, and then of course academia comes second, and then government, nonprofit are lower in their preference. So that's interesting. And also we have to remember that these Generation Z students will have multiple jobs, multiple careers. So they, when they're taking their career pathway preferences, they're taking more than one at a time. So we recognize that these skill-based education is necessary, and as many other universities, we're developing and exploring newer ways to do this.
Will part of that be, do you think, strengthening ties with research industries in order to give students the outcomes that they want?
Yeah, absolutely. So research industries, they can be actually a number of different things. We really do think, but because there is a conflict or fight for students' time, right? So there are supervisors who might have lived a pretty traditional, pure academia life, might expect their students to do the same, right? And completely focus on their research for the entire 5 years. But then, the students themselves might be longing for experience and learning in the skills department. And so we think oftentimes, and we haven't quite materialized solid ways to do this, but internship in the industry might be a very nice way to not only collaborate, but facilitate the learning by doing. So that's a definite potential.
Do you think that over time? Sorry, go ahead.
If I could add a point to what Misaki shared as well, we are finding in our work with businesses and with industry that some, really new age, exciting career paths are emerging for students. And, what we've been doing is we've been saying, look, and I'll take the example of engineering students for a moment. But if you look at engineering disciplines, you can actually say that, look, what are the new exciting paths that are emerging, and can universities and can students work towards those? And in disciplines like computer science, this might be a little bit more well understood. So, you might say, look, you're studying undergrad or master's or even a PhD in computer science, and you want to target a career path as an AI specialist, or you want to target a career path as a cybersecurity specialist, or cloud computing and so on. But at times, what's not as equally well understood is you might be studying to be an electrical engineer, or you might be studying to be an electronics engineer. And there are, exciting career opportunities in topics like wearable technology, Internet of Things, nanosensors, even electric vehicles, which is big, but probably not as appreciated. Or, if you were to look at a more traditional engineering stream like mechanical engineering, working with mechatronics or working with additive manufacturing. And so I think that understanding to say what are some of these new exciting career paths that are emerging in industry, and then saying, what is the curricula, what is the hands-on learning that builds towards that. And then lastly saying, look, maybe a lot of that is going to come from faculty on campus at the university, but maybe there are disciplines where you should be reaching out to experts around the world, whether they are on your campus, in your country, or somewhere in the world. And I think that's possible, on the Coursera platform for that matter. And I think that's an approach that we're seeing a lot of value coming out of.
Misaki mentioned earlier that there was this slight conflict in terms of time and the cultural shift away from tutors who are used to spending perhaps their whole careers in academia, who are now teaching students who have a much more ambition to work with industry or to integrate an industry in different ways. Raghav, do you think we'll get to a point where we see more joint roles in faculty as well as offering things like placement and work experience? Are we moving towards a point where in the coming years it won't be unusual for the faculty and teachers to actually have some kind of role in industry themselves and split their time between industry and academia?
I don't really have a very specific response to that, but I can maybe again broaden this a little bit. I do think we are seeing larger participation of industry in academia and academia and industry. And I think the pandemic is accelerating this. And I'll use a data point from our learning, which I think is quite relevant to share. There are 55 companies that author content on Coursera. And a lot of this has happened over the last 3-4 years. It's got accelerated because of the pandemic. So companies like Google and IBM and Facebook and Salesforce author content on the Coursera platform. They've authored about 800 odd courses. But what's interesting is that these courses have been taken by 11 million individuals. And many of these are actually students on campus. And when I look at usage data on our platform, that user could be a working professional, that user could be a student on a campus, and so on. A lot of the usage of industry-produced content is actually happening among students on campuses. And so I think this trend that we are seeing, that there will be stronger linkages, bigger participation between industry and academia, I think is what we're definitely seeing. Will it translate specifically into a faculty member also playing roles in industry and vice versa? I would imagine so, but I don't know if I have a very well thought out point of view on that just yet.
No, I appreciate I'm asking you to predict the future. It's not always easy.
It's safe to say I will get it wrong, because any prediction, that's what you would expect to get. But yeah, that's what I'll say for the moment on that.
Okay. Misaki, do you think along those lines too, that culturally, as the PhD students you are teaching now always become academics or go to work in industry, that we may see a blurring of the line between academia and industry in terms of how they work and spend their time?
Yeah, I think that's unavoidable, actually. I think this kind of conscious division between fundamental science or basic science and applied science, I think, will be blurred also. It's happening already. And some of our professors, although we're very, most purely research university, do come from industry, and we do have a department within our university for translation of discovery and to broaden the impact of our science. So it's happening, and even within this THE summit, many of the discussions have been, how do we navigate through these diversification but integration of foresight and efforts? And the truth is, our students, the people who are students right now, will be at the forefront of integration. So we better give them opportunities to be prepared for that.
And the point you were making earlier about how your group work encourages teaching skills such as project management, better communication, and problem solving. To this, are these the attributes that are required in order to improve personalization of learning overall? Once you give a student those skills, are they better placed to take a look at electronic platforms and see, Coursera, for example, has many, many courses on offer. They then have the critical faculty and the project management and the time management skills to personalize their learning in a way that creates opportunities for them that the universities can support.
Right. So that's another what is that? A characteristic, very strong characteristic of Gen Z is that, even in Asia, even in Japan, where, conformity to the collective has been very valued traditionally, this focus on individualism and how how the students actually, like Raghav said, the job market is going to be very, very competitive, although very diversified. So everybody has to think about, so what do I have that nobody else has? Every graduate of our university will have a PhD in science. What else do you have, right? So that individual unique attributes and strengths that each person, each student has to cultivate while they're here with us, it does come into focus.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we've had quite a few questions from the audience, so I'm going to bring in a couple of those just so we have a chance so we can answer the question to the people who are watching. And thank you again, everyone in the audience, for joining us today. The first question we've had is, how can we develop flexible curriculum which can adapt to present and future competency needs as well as lifelong learning? Raghav, I know Coursera has a keen focus on supporting lifelong learning as part of its offering. Are there already sort of modes of best practice and how curricula is changing in order to support lifelong learning? I mean, is it through micro credentials? Is it through short courses? I mean, are these being integrated into the APAC universities that Coursera is partnering with?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I think it starts with understanding of what the intent of that curriculum might be, right? So the example I was taking, a mechanical engineer or a electronics engineer working towards a particular career that they might aspire to. And then what I think we are doing in our work with universities in Asia, and universities are doing it themselves as well, is saying, can I embed flexibility? Can I embed courses? Can I embed projects? Can I embed certificates and even micro credentials from the Coursera platform into the curricula as well? Some of this could be possibly credit bearing. Some of this could be choice based as well. And I think the third kind of step that I would add, to my 1 to 3 step cycle is universities are also working towards measuring how the skill development is happening and also preparing something new, which is a skill profile of a student and enabling them to show that to, possible recruiters, possible employers as well. Traditionally, we've always had, mark sheets and CGPAs and so on and so forth. But if I think about my earlier example to say, look, a computer science student wants to work towards becoming a full stack web developer in a tech product company. The tech product company will tell you, look, here are the 6 skills that we need. And here is the level of proficiency that we need you to have on each of those 6 skills. And, our platform has been built up to actually provide skill development dashboards to say, in January 2021, you started at X level, and after a period of 6 months and after a period of 12 months, you reached Y by this level of skill development to happen. So I think that's an important additional piece to possibly keep in mind as well, that along with the learning, the flexibility, the career orientation, the ability to measure and the ability to demonstrate that development as well.
Thank you, Raghav. Misaki, to that point, I mean, you mentioned that OIST is only 9 years old, but obviously the founders had quite a forward-thinking approach, and they were looking at building curricula and support for students. Is lifelong learning something that you think about in the current setup? I mean, I appreciate that the focus is very much on PhDs, but as the PhD students that you have now will require upskilling and reskilling over the course of their working lives, is this something that might start to be offered more by institutions such as yourself, so you have slightly more agile curricula with shorter courses that offer upskilling and reskilling?
Right. So, let me share with you something that dawned on me early on while listening to the THE sessions, is that, life of research is actually that of lifelong learning, right? so it's when we're actually talking about faculty to kind of, on this discussion of how important these lifelong learning skills, they're already bought into it, right? And as I was describing, actually to jump off from what Raghav was saying, was that in our curriculum, professional career development curriculum, part 2 of that, after the group project and all of that, part 2 of that is a individualized collection of what's offered as a smorgasbord of these skills opportunities. So that could be seminars, it could be actually on the ground teaching, or it could be actually taking external courses, or participating in kind of a problem-based projects. In terms of technical skills, picking up individual technical skills, we do offer non-credit bearing courses that are available for not only students, but also postdoctoral researchers, even faculty. And then, all of those will eventually contribute to sharpening the uniqueness of that talent. It's not a matter of if, it's how we're going to do this.
It sounds like I was interviewing one senior leader about this a couple of weeks ago, and they mentioned that universities they've already done quite a lot to support micro credentialing and upskilling and reskilling. They just haven't quite formalized it in the way that perhaps the press or politicians are talking about, so people don't necessarily realize that it's already in place. But once they start to, once it becomes more widespread, presumably there will be more interest, and it will keep going from there. We've got time for one more question, I think, which is, we've had a couple along the same lines. It's how the skills that are in demand by employers are changing due to digitization in the pandemic, and how can universities address these developments? Raghav, you already spoke a little bit about this in terms of the feedback you were getting from employers about the type of skills that they want. Is it really a case of building that sort of front and center into the curriculum, into the offering for students of all ages and all types?
It is partly that, Alistair, but there's one additional point I would like to call out, right? And I've discussed this with a number of peers in industry, with a number of colleagues as well, right? Changes to skills have always been the case, right? It's been the case over the last 50, 100 years. There is new technology coming, I think it's always been the case. I think the biggest difference this time is the pace of change. I think that's the biggest difference this time. And traditionally, universities have said, look, I will set up a department of data science. I will set up a department of X, right? And over a period of 2 years, 5 years, I will get that capability in-house, and I will have the expertise in-house. The pace of change this time, and then accelerated by COVID, right? Accelerated by the fact that we will continue to work from home for an extended period of time, that digitization is, kicking in. I think the pace of change is changing the need to not just look internally, but also look externally. And the fact that students are getting to learn on campus from faculty, but also industry experts and also subject matter experts from anywhere in the world, as a result of what we are doing on Coursera. I think that's the biggest change that we're seeing. I think technology changing has always been with us forever.
Great, thank you very much. Misaki, do you have anything to add about, in terms of, if you've seen any particular types of skills that are becoming more in demand now, or is it a case of seeing the natural growth over the life cycle of continuing that engagement with your students and your faculty in order to teach the most in demand skills?
Yeah, again, we're not undergraduate university. So some speaker earlier said that if we actually, based on demand, then everybody will become a coder. That won't happen to our university. There are very listening to all this conversation makes me realize that when industry and university, or different types of universities, or the government funding and basic research, all these things are trying to merge together, what has to happen is that we need to work as a bunch of human beings, right? And then so that kind of interpersonal relationship, communication, cross-cultural communication, ability to problem solve from the whole tackling of the wicked problem by design thinking, or that kind of thing, that is going to be demanded no matter what our students will become as their jobs. So that those things will be heavily, they're here to stay. They'll be a focus of our students.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, that takes us up to time. I'm sorry we didn't have time to answer everyone's questions from the audience, but thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Viraga, and to Misaki, for their insights. They were really valuable and appreciated.